There's a lot to love in Little Bird, but the world building constantly made me smile, page after page after page. And Little Bird is a comic that doesn't want to hold your hand, it doesn't have to explain every single moment as it happens, the structure behind a character it might introduce and move on after a few pages or whatever. It treats its readers like they're already privy to a lot of the world's workings, and in that it's able to move the story and the world in more dynamic, interesting ways. It's worth talking about the page length of Little Bird, each issue having about 36 pages of story. And depending on publisher, that's 12 to 16 pages more per issue than you'll regularly find, and it means that the pacing can be different. It gives moments room to breathe, and stops the problem of a lot of first issues of comics that want to try and spend one issue establishing character and world before the story really even starts. Little Bird manages a story almost immediately from page 1, and it sets up the world in just a few pages more. So I want to discuss a little bit more of that in this episode, and talk a little bit about how it does this. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So if you look at the start, we get Little Bird's mother in Canada as explained by this title caption, with a hint of Native American imagery in the visuals, talking about protecting the land for years. She stands on something akin to a totem pole, amongst people with bows and arrows and spears, with houses made in the dirt, dug up below ground level. Men with guns stand on the edges watching the trees. And there's so much here already, right? There's kind of like a glimpse of their lives as technology, clearly limited access to modern weaponry. And it's a culture that is clearly quite different to that modern weaponry too. And page 2 shows the houses, characters in work clothing, brick buildings that don't scream of the future, trees with what look like communication devices built into them. So tech is clearly limited, scarce, and a community under attack. There isn't pages and pages here spent building this up, but they just give you this cliff notes of the world and the characters very, very quickly. Little Bird's mother's seniority, her prowess, the way she leaps from the podium to the ground, it's all character and world building done in a way that doesn't bog the story down, and asks a greater level of work from the reader to help craft this narrative from these details. And that's important for a couple of reasons, right? Because firstly it means as a reader, you end up putting a lot into this world yourself. A lot of it's on the page, but Van Polges, Bertram, Hollingsworth and Bidikar invite you to look at that world more deeply and see all of this stuff. And a few pages later, after Little Bird comes out of the underground bunker to find her world has been fried in battle, she comes upon a soldier from the United Nations of America. There's no heavy exposition explaining who this soldier is. Instead, Little Bird just picks up this helmet, sort of emitting noise, and looks inside, where we learn about the religious overtones of the UNA, and look at some of the larger world building and fighting narrative, but also it tells you about the technological advances that America has that Canada doesn't. And it's so unceremonious. It doesn't call attention to itself, instead opting to operate at a level of naturalism that is honestly quite rare to find. And characters do talk about the world, the instance here with Bishop is a good example of that. There's a bunch of dialogue that does explain it all, that does lead through words, but it's exposition that doesn't call attention to itself as that. It's a character being a character, rather than merely a timely mouthpiece for the author to explain the necessary detail for you to understand this. And going back to issue length, that makes such a difference in how the team are able to do this. I'd argue that for Little Bird issue 1, you maybe only get the full context of this by page 12 or 13, and even that might be a little too clear, we don't really meet Axe until page 20 for example. So most comics want to try and establish something within the first 5 to 8 pages, and so it means leaning a little quicker on exposition, or maybe like an intense action moment. Little Bird does none of those. But it's not just the writing, or the way Bertram builds the pages, it's also in Matt Hollingsworth's colours. The opening scenes have these kind of earthy tones, these browns, darker oranges, greens. It looks like the world as we know it, the natural world. The buildings are all natural colours, evoking the landscape, blending well into the world around them. It tells you about the characters, right? It tells you about their connection to a simpler way of life, something calmer, more natural, more beautiful, and in harmony with the world. And when Little Bird sees the scorched earth, the remnants of this battle, it's got a tinge of pink along with the orange. At first I wondered if this was just the glow of sunset or flames or heat, but the palette changes quite dramatically when we get back to that moment where Little Bird puts on the headset and she sees the video transmission. Inside that headset is pink, the monitor is purple. You can see it most clearly on this page, where the outside world remains the brown earthy feel, and the top half of the page has this purple cast across it. The thing I constantly reference in this show is If It's Purple Someone's Gonna Die by Patti Bellantoni. The name gives it away, right? If it's purple, someone's gonna die, and often purple is the colour of the evil enemy of Ursula from Disney and the like. The book's world building is not then just in its line work, not just in its story, but built into the foundation of its colours too. And so work is being done in all these levels to allow the comic to move away from forced exposition, and give you what otherwise might have been slipped into a conversation instead through character action and colour palettes. I mentioned right near the start that the comic relies on you as a reader to build these connections yourself, right? The caption on page 9, New Vatican, the United Nations of America, is another example of the comic doing just that. It requires a knowledge from the reader of the United States of America, and a little on the Vatican, though not as much, now playing on the concept you already have off against a slight rewording on the page. The caption functions so much more actively than another location caption might, even though it looks similar to any other caption. Establishing the concept of how America has changed is handled so well in that one moment, even before you see the landscape of crosses in the art. The caption asks you to understand what that change means, right? What does United Nations mean that United States doesn't? It doesn't have a page of dialogue with characters discussing how that's changed, discussing the history, or, captions talking about how the world changed. It just presents a slightly altered concept and allows you as a reader to build that in your mind, to understand the difference between here and there. And it powerfully gets you to build that yourself. And by building that, we are now fully involved in the world building. This comic requires something of you. It doesn't just leave you as a passive viewer, but it builds you as a historian to this place, right? And because of that, it allows you to build a much stronger emotional connection to this. A Little Bird could be condensed down, to its detriment, of course. It could likely have been moulded around a more traditional 20 to 24 page issue count, but it makes an incredibly strong case for what opening up those extra pages allows you to do in monthly comics. There is part of its freshness that just comes directly from that page count, that it eschews traditional plot points and beats in first issues, and I hope we start to see a little more of this page flexibility from publishers that can operate like that. But you do need a team like Van Polgeest, Bertram, Hollingsworth and Bidekar that can take that and run with it. Not just pad out the pages, but make everyone invite and build, creating page after page of dynamic, interesting characters and worlds, and making it look effortless by using you as the reader to help build that story too. Thanks for watching. And Strip Panel Naked is supported by Patreon, where you can get access to over 2 years worth of exclusive writing and analysis from me. You can also find me on Twitter at HassanOE and get panel by panel from panelxpanel.com. Hit the button to subscribe and the notification bell to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and I will see you next time.